Hi, and welcome to another edition of Digital Partners AI podcast, where we explore how technology, leadership, and artificial intelligence are reshaping industries. I'm your host, Danielle Paul-Solin. Today, we're diving into a challenge that financial service companies know all too well: integrating old systems with new technology. In a world of instant payments, embedded finance, and rapidly evolving compliance rules, the ability to modernize is no longer optional, it's critical. Joining me today is Wade, CEO and co-founder of Movieio, a company that's refining how money moves by providing modern, open source infrastructure for financial services. Wade, welcome to the show.
Danielle,
Very
thanks for having me
welcome.
this morning. I
So,
appreciate it.
can you start by telling our listeners about your journey in fintech and what inspired you to launch Movieio?
Absolutely. So I've been in this space, it feels like for a long time, but honestly, kind of the impetus of it is I used to work for Macromedia, if you remember that company, Dreamweaver and Flash and things like that. And we connected these Flash websites back to mainframe systems in order to do loan applications and account opening, and that was my first foray into financial services. And think about like the modern tech of Flash. Oh, you can do anything with that, but you still had this IBM Z series mainframe that actually had all of the bank account information. And so after leaving there, I started a digital banking company called Banno. Banno grew up and was acquired by Jack Henry and is currently the digital banking platform for 14 million Americans. And then, that was, both the loan application and then Banno were really a front end application. And so I was always dependent on these back end systems in order to do these beautiful user experiences I wanted to create. And those systems weren't designed. They weren't designed for the internet. They weren't designed for mobile. They were designed for you to walk into brick and mortar. And that really ultimately led me to starting Move to say, somebody's got to build this from the ground up. And
Right.
that's what we're doing
So
at
basically, you've
Move.
been involved in building financial technology for years. What pain points did you see in the industry that led you to create Movieio?
There's really in banking and then in payments, all of the systems were really written in the 60s and 70s. And then you can kind of think of it. The nice analogy is it's like an onion. There's just layers that have been put around it. A less nice analogy is like Chernobyl. Like we don't exactly know how this thing works in the middle. Let's surround it with concrete and only, really make sure we watch what goes in and out of that area. But those systems work, right? So you can you can kind of joke about it, but they work. They've been functioning, and they have millions, if not billions, of edge cases that have been tried and tested on them. And so people build around them. And whether that's digital banking companies building around this legacy system that was built for a teller line, or modern payment companies like Braintree or Stripe that were, gateways that are built around kind of this legacy low-level processor. So the last 10, 15 years has really been, let's build better UIs, better access patterns to these legacy systems. And I think what's happening now in financial services is, a handful of companies move on the payment side. Thought Machine on the core banking side have said, let's just start from scratch. We've both gone out and raised a whole lot of money. But when I say from scratch, I mean socket connection and build it all the way back up so that our customers can get access to things like data, reliability, scalability, and these are really critical features that you need in a
Yeah.
internet and
Um,
AI era.
I mean, I found that the financial services space has been a bit slow to adopt change. And in that, what challenges have you faced in convincing institutions to modernize?
I think the drivers like In the UK, Monzo, or in the United States, Chime, are great user experiences. We think of them as the neobanks or digital banks, but in order to build the following and loyalty of customers that they have, they themselves rebuilt the technology stack underpinning financial services, um, and they don't offer it to anyone else, right? If you're Barclays, you don't get to go get the Monzo technology stack, and so I think some of those companies really led the push to modernization. And modernization for the sake of modernization is an unfunded project, but modernization for the sake of, wow, my customer acquisition costs, my NPS scores, the rate at which I can release features, um, my uptime and availability. These are all things that are more easily measured, that result in satisfied customers and
Yeah.
ultimately revenue
I mean,
growth for those companies.
that's great, and I hear where you're coming from. From that experience, what's the one lesson you've learned about balancing innovation with compliance in fintech?
Innovation and compliance in fintech is a juxtaposition. In 2010, I was explaining, in the United States, we have the OCC, and I was explaining them, how much safer cloud computing was than having, a raised floor, air conditioned servers that maybe two people know how they're working and two people are keeping them safe and secure. Um, and and it's not that they were opposed to cloud computing, was that they didn't understand cloud computing. Why would we put something so important as balances and everything about a customer on somebody else's computers that you don't manage? And so for me, it's always been an educational experience with the regulators, and from a compliance standpoint. And if you can find the team that actually seeks to understand, rather than, here's the, checkbox manifesto of what's allowed and not allowed. Um, Most regulations are written by design for interpretation rather than, like multi-factor. It doesn't say you have to use a YubiKey. It says you need you need to authenticate out of band, right? So it's by design not prescriptive in how you do it. It's designed to safeguard the consumer. And so I think as long as you're always leaning towards a better consumer experience, which is security, reliability, availability, the compliance team can follow along as long as you give them the room
And when it
to
comes
be
to
educated.
integrating AI into financial services, what do you think the biggest roadblock has been caused by the legacy systems?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So if these systems that were designed, um, on mainframes, right? Like they were as excited when they got off a mainframe and got
It's funny
up
because
onto an
you're saying
AIX
mainframe,
machine,
and
which,
it conjures in my
for
mind.
most,
Probably watching too many movies, but you know some of these movies. I can't even think to recall which one it was, but these massive rooms with just lines and lines of these glass boxes with these mainframes with so many dots in it. That's what's being conjured up into my mind. Um,
and that's absolutely accurate, right? That is,
yes,
it's like a scene from the Matrix, right? But it's um, but the reason there's so much legacy tech in payments and banking is because they were the first adopters of computers. So you think about where IBM came from. I mean, the first things they were selling were automation for banking. And so these systems are robust. They exist from a long time ago. Like there was no ride sharing app, when mainframes were invented, because there was no computing and there's no mobile devices. But but it's really that, back to your question. these systems were designed to throw away data. Bits mattered versus bytes. Um, if you think about your bank statement, it's the length of the memo description, date, and amount is there, and it's the requirement for that was an IBM A9 dot matrix printer. And so it's
Right.
not a database constraint, it was a paper constraint. And so it's by design an industry that threw away data in order to save it. And so I think there's a lot of like thought leaders that say, well, banks have all the data. They know everything that you do. Like, no, they know your balance, right? They've thrown away everything you do. And so I think um, a lot of banking, like we've gotten to AI in the general populace because 15 years ago we were talking about big data, and then we were talking, what do we do with all this data that we're saving, and we got into um, you know more really statistical based or AI kind of version one of taking advantage of that data. And now when we have generative AI, if you're in financial services, you're 15 years behind if you didn't go through this last transition that the rest of tech did. And so to your question, it's like, well, where do you plug in the AI into financial services and
Yeah.
payments if you don't
Yeah, and
have the data?
because of that, you have to ask, how AI is going to help financial institutions or institutions bridge the gap between old infrastructure and modern customer demands. How do you think that's going to happen? How's the gap going to be bridged?
I think like every industry, it's going to touch everything, but the places that we see it happening right now is there's so many processes that use automation or you know, OCR with templates on it in order to scan all of these documents. And so the biggest impact today is there are so many workflows in banking, and just think as a listener how many big banks you've seen, like the big buildings. Like those buildings are just full of people doing workflows, approving a wire, opening a bank account, closing a banking account. Somebody died. How do we get money to their family members? Like there's tens of thousands of workflows that happen inside of a financial institution, and they're all tedious. And so I think AI's biggest impact in kind of phase one is going to be how do we decrease that tedious workflow at the financial institution. The result of that though is frankly better customer service, right? I get my answers or get my loan or I get my refund faster. Um, where I'm most excited though is financial services is not evenly distributed. If you have something called a private banker, your experience inside of financial services is much different than the rest of society. And that's just some arbitrary line that we're able to give high net worth individuals better financial support, financial services, because you can pay for, some a more expensive human that knows more about things. And so my biggest excitement is that level of personalization and customization inside of payments and financial services isn't some elite private banker thing, but that gets commoditized. And so, the new grad out of college actually gets all of the information that used to be reserved for only the elite. Um, and I think AI has the power to commoditize that or frankly force the commoditization. And so maybe we have a more
Yeah,
empowered and
I mean,
financially literate
one
society.
thing that always comes up in these podcasts when I'm speaking to people like yourselves is about um, the humanization of AI or the lack of humanization and about building relationships with people. Now that is especially important in banking. You know, when you think back to the old style of doing things where you had a bank manager, and you went in and you saw the local bank manager to get a loan, etc. And you're correct, it wasn't always accessible for everybody or every level in society. And I think it's important that you do maintain, even in this world of AI, that personal touch, because as you mentioned earlier, for example, the bank like Monzo, for example, you know, it's online, it's great, and it's great to use. It's fast, you can send money here, you can receive money, from multiple different places. But then when you have an issue, or if there's an issue, it's so hard to speak to somebody. So how do you get around that in this new AI world that we're living in? That personal touch. How do you get around that?
I absolutely believe in everything you're saying here. We're at Move, one of the ways that we try and differentiate is just fanatical customer support. And it's because our competitors are so big, certain customers stop mattering at a certain size. And so it's like, how as a startup do you differentiate? Just give fantastic customer support. I think a couple areas there that are interesting to me to watch, and I wish I knew the answer, but I don't. Um, the first is that I think these need to augment us. They need to not replace us. And so I always think about, I'm 48. I remember going from like a typewriter to a word processor, and that was a step function, right? And there were people in the typewriter era that thought like, well, that was better because you just thought about it. You had to put in the work before you wrote your document. And in a word processor, you can just throw whatever you want into it, rearrange it, do whatever you want. And when do you actually think about the content that you're creating? Whereas a computer scientist, if you used to code a web page in text editor, it's like bracket HTML. Oh, forgot to close the bracket versus, a fancier editor that auto completes all of those type of tools. To me, I don't, I just see humans just getting way more efficient with a step function of better tools with AI. In the same way that maybe we all feel old that, we have our laptop and, I can type any email. Like, can you? Like, I can't type an email without Grammarly and spell checker and all these. Like, I was already augmenting myself. I just want to augment myself better. And so I think strategically, companies need to be thinking about empowering employees with these tools and making them more efficient, versus replacing people. And when I see that chatbot prompt and it says powered by a company I know, like, oh man, I'm just going right 000 or whatever to get out of this thing, right? But if the person servicing me, had AI and, here's four different things we think they're looking for, and automatically fetch the data, and now the human is a 10x human,
Yeah.
I'm really
Um,
excited
and
about that
and
world.
I think due to that, many banks will struggle with marketing. Um, and I think, how could AI-driven insights improve client acquisition in financial services?
For us, there's always been the hope of a next best product, which in financial services, frankly, was tied to age, and income. And so if you're in your mid 20s, you're making $100,000 a year. We notice we don't have a mortgage, we don't have a car loan, but you live in New York. Here's your payment for $3,200 a month for your rental property. Uh, Now a financial services person is really using those personas and that very limited input to reach out to you about saving in order to acquire a property in the future. Um, that's really rudimentary when you think about all the signals, you know, we should be thinking about, are they moving? Are they closing my bank account? Um, can I get them out of that college, credit card that was like the worst thing ever, but it was the only thing they qualified for, and get them into a better product? And so I think the customization level at an individual, rather than going through, oh, we have 5 or 10 user journeys at our bank, to what it what is the user journey for Daniel? Now we can get better product
Yeah.
offerings.
I agree totally with what you're saying. In your experience, though, how can AI help detect patterns in payment data to reduce fraud without slowing down to transactions? Because fraud is always one of the things that, as technology gets better, it appears as though people are getting better at creating fraudulent ways to get in between people's transactions or hack people's accounts, etc. How do you think AI can help to detect those patterns?
Yeah, so today in financial services, everything is rules based, number one. So send an alert if you spend more than $10,000. And then number two is regression analysis. So the other rule in there is fraudsters kind of figure out that you have a limit, and they figure out how to get close to that limit in order to um, maximize the fraud. And where I think generative AI has a really great opportunity in financial services is taking all of those behavioral inputs and interacting back with the customer in order to validate that it's them. So um, right now we don't, there's the device system, there's the payment system, there's the login system. All of these things are picking up different signals. Um, Most of them are running independently of one another. And so when things go wrong, it hits a call center. That's a horrible user experience, or the transactions just declined. Whereas with AI, we should be able to interact, and prove the person who they are, or they're trying to do something unique, collect that information, and let that payment go through
So you
safely.
definitely think there's room to improve those um, AI services, so there isn't those big gaps or inconveniences to the customer.
Absolutely. The default is shut everything down. If we detect fraud, shut it down, because the bank bears the liability. Um, but that's such a horrible user experience, because you don't know why you were shut down. You don't know what you need to do to overcome being shut down. You're probably still standing in the store wondering why your card didn't go through. So it's
Yeah.
shameful. So all those things, I think we can close the loop, and make that a more human
Yeah,
experience.
I agree. There has been a couple of times for myself where I've been in the store and something's been declined, and then I've got this text message coming, which is, to be honest, I do think it's become a lot quicker. You get these text messages, did you try to make this transaction? Type yes or no. And actually, I have to admit, again, they're quite quick in saying, well, thanks for telling us about that, and you can now move on with that transaction. But yeah, I mean, there were times, some probably in my 20s and my 30s, where there were some embarrassing times in stores, and I'm thinking to myself, but there's money in there, and they're saying, well, your card's been declined. So yeah, it could definitely do with improving the customer experience, and I think they're getting there. If you're advising a financial services company stuck with outdated tech, what's the first AI powered step you would suggest that they take?
It's a great question. I think I would look at things like Wiredesk. Like, a Wiredesk is a very expensive place where there's a lot of human interaction. It's really frustrating for the end user, because they're finally, buying a home or buying a car. It's these large disbursement patterns, and they cost a lot of money, right? A lot of times we charge $15, $20 in order to get your money, right? And that's just because they do so much to make sure they don't send the money to the wrong person or the wrong institution. Think about selling your home. Um, there's just a lot of overhead in there for reasonable costs, and so that's a highly inefficient business process that I think AI can get an immediate win. And why would I recommend that to the financial institution is because success breeds success. So if you can go solve an expensive problem and even get a 30% gain, now you have the freedom to go affect other departments that maybe be a little bit more efficient,
Yeah.
but you can help them as
And,
well.
and that makes a lot of sense. As you said, those are probably the two of the biggest purchases that people make. But you also have to remember that the bank is liable, which is why there's so much check boxes and hoops that you have to jump through in order for those things to go through. With you just being a human, you're thinking, oh, why can't it be faster? Because you're thinking, by now it should be faster. But you're absolutely right. There is liability there, and we have to give the banking service grace until there are things like you've suggested that are put into the system to make it a much smoother experience for the end user. So I agree with that. Now, I have to congratulate you because I know that you've just finished your FinTech DevCon, which I am assuming, and I'm sure I'm assuming correctly, was successful. Tell me, how did it go? What was it like?
Yeah, for me, FinTech DevCon's like a passion project. Financial services, when I entered financial services, it was really big vendors. This, safety, security is too scary. Just buy our black box and don't worry how it works. And that's just fundamentally not true. Like if technologists can make AI, they can figure out financial services, especially since it's all been documented for a long period of time. So FinTech DevCon brings in 4 keynote speakers. Those are the 4 that I get to pick that are really really technical speakers. I really enjoyed like Harsh, the CTO of Wise. We had EVP from PayPal. So getting to see their big global picture views. But then there's 48 talks, and those 48 talks are from 186 submissions. And these are just developers, technical product managers. It may be the first time they've ever spoken in front of a crowd. And we have 4 rooms that are going for 2.5 days. And it's just tech talk after tech talk, no sales pitches, no product catalogs. It's just, how did I fix this really hard problem? How did I make a dual entry ledger scale to 5,000 transactions per second? What happens when you actually tap that EMV chip to a terminal? Like exactly how does that flow back to the financial institution? So it's a really fun event because the energy is great because you have all these builders and 400 plus builders in Denver, Colorado. And so not only are the sessions great, but the happy hours and all the different fun conversations that happen around coffee at the conference are almost just as
And
good as the
I can
speakers
tell
themselves.
you're really passionate about fintech and putting that together and being part of that. And I know also that you've got now another 354 days until the next one. So there's plenty of time to plan
That's right.
and get those applications in.
Yeah. And if you're listening, Call for Papers will be open soon. So we'd love to have you. Yeah, about 20% of the speakers come internationally. So we had, London, Singapore, Brazil, South Africa, Poland. It was really great to just have this world audience that comes together in order to share and
And
build
that's
one
great.
another up.
And we're now coming to the end of the podcast, and because we've just spoken about the fintech, what I'd like you to do is let the listeners know how they could get more information about fintech, and also about Move AI. How can they find out more about you and about the services that you offer?
Absolutely, Daniel. So we're at move.io is the company name. It's FinTech DevCon.io is the conference name. But please follow me on LinkedIn. I'm at Wade Arnold, and I post about 3 times a week, or at least I try to. You know how that actually goes when you get busy. And then I'm at Wade Arnold
That's
on
lovely.
GitHub
That's
and
great.
on X as well.
Thank you so much, Wade. Thank you for coming on and giving us all that information and sharing your experiences in the banking world and your